The first time I realized how cruel favoritism could be was the day I accused Vanessa Collins of stealing our class funds, and instead of being proven right, I was treated like the villain in my own story. The entire room filled with accusing eyes as if I had committed an unforgivable sin just by pointing it out, and when she fled the classroom in tears, stumbling down the staircase and hurting her leg, I didn't feel vindicated at all. Just a creeping sense of dread because I knew exactly who would stand up for Ethan Miller, the boy who had been part of my life since childhood, the boy everyone thought I was destined to marry because our families had promised it years ago, and yet in that moment, he looked at me as if I was the worst kind of person, locking me out on a rainy night like I was nothing more than a stray begging for shelter, his words sharp and condescending when he said, "What qualifications do you have to humiliate Vanessa?" as if I was some jealous, bitter outsider rather than the girl who grew up in his house, the girl who used to be his closest friend. And it cut deeper than the freezing rain soaking my clothes because he added with that same detached cruelty, "If it weren't for our engagement, you'd still be stuck in the countryside instead of living in my home. Like every sacrifice, every memory we shared meant nothing at all." And I stood outside his family's mansion shivering so hard I could barely breathe, my lips pale, my arms pressed tight against my chest as I tried to block out the storm under the meager cover of the eaves, the nanny glancing at me with pity but unable to open the door, whispering apologies I didn't want to hear because I knew she was just afraid of losing her job. And I told her weakly it was okay, just to bring me my phone so I could call a cab and escape this humiliation, but she couldn't even do that, so I stayed there in the storm, the night endless, my body stiffening as the hours passed, until Ethan finally appeared with Vanessa by his side, her eyes wide with feigned innocence while he looked down at me with those unreadable dark eyes and demanded to know if I still refused to apologize, and in that moment, I broke, not because I thought I was wrong, but because survival instinct crushed my pride, the cold sinking into my bones until my teeth chattered uncontrollably, my knees giving out as I bowed my head and whispered an apology that tasted like blood in my throat, my body sagging under the weight of his disdain while Vanessa hid behind him like the delicate victim she wanted everyone to believe she was, and when she whispered that it was cold and begged Ethan to go inside, he didn't even look at me again, just took her hand and shut the door in my face, leaving me in the dark with nothing but the rain pounding against my skin, and as I squatted by the steps hugging my knees, fighting the dizziness in my head, I thought bitterly that this was the same boy who once pulled me out of my village, promising me chocolate and holding my hand as if we would never be separated, the boy who used to pout when I didn't follow him, the boy who used to say he didn't want me to leave his side, and yet here he was, shutting the door on me like I was a stranger. And when my fever spiked days later, leaving me bedridden, I dreamed of those simpler times, of a chubby little boy with stubborn eyes shoving Ferrero Rocher into my hand as if it was the greatest treasure in the world, telling me I couldn't refuse him, and in my dream I smiled like nothing would ever change, but waking up to Ethan's indifferent voice beside my bed, asking me what I had dreamed about, made me realize everything had already changed beyond recognition. Because when I whispered, "I don't remember," with my voice hoarse from sickness, it wasn't a lie, it was self-preservation, and even when he offered me water and teased that I hadn't said thank you to him in years, I couldn't bring myself to care. My heart a hollow shell drained by that night's rainstorm, because something inside me had died when he chose Vanessa over me, and though his mother later rushed back from overseas to scold him and gently suggest we move forward with our engagement after graduation, this time I didn't wait for him to reject it like I always feared he would. Instead, I was the one who smiled politely and said no, that there was no need to rush, and Ethan, for once, was stunned, staring at me like he couldn't understand when I had learned to stop waiting for him, but I had already decided. The first thing I would do once I was strong enough was apply for a transfer, because no matter how much the rain burned into my skin that night, nothing hurt more than realizing that Ethan Miller would never choose me, not when Vanessa Collins was always there to play the perfect victim. And as I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling of the room that no longer felt like mine, I knew that this was only the beginning of the end. After that night, everything inside me shifted. It was as if the storm had washed away the last remnants of the girl who used to chase after Ethan Miller, who used to defend him in front of everyone, who used to imagine a future where our childhood engagement would naturally turn into a marriage, and in its place stood someone who finally understood her place in the story, the supporting character who had overstayed her welcome in the Miller household. The girl from the countryside who could never compete with the fragile beauty of Vanessa Collins, and as I lay recovering from my fever, I made a silent vow that I wouldn't waste another ounce of energy fighting for someone who had already made his choice. I wouldn't be humiliated again by begging for scraps of affection, so I smiled politely when Mrs. Miller returned from her trip, fussing over me with genuine warmth, scolding Ethan for being so reckless, suggesting that we should go ahead and finalize our engagement after graduation to settle him down. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel my heart race with expectation. Instead, I shook my head gently and said there was no need, my voice steady as I refused on his behalf. And the way Ethan's eyes flickered with surprise told me he never expected me to be the one to let go. He was supposed to reject me, not the other way around, but I was tired of playing that role. So when I returned to school, I no longer hovered near his desk, no longer complained about how close he sat with Vanessa, no longer picked fights that only ended with me looking like the jealous fiancé while she played the innocent victim. Instead, I sat in my corner, kept my head down, and focused on my studies. Even when Vanessa's round doe eyes turned toward me with her fake apologies that always carried a blade hidden beneath, telling me she couldn't forgive me because I had caused her irreversible harm, I just nodded, stirred my porridge, and kept quiet because I finally understood that making her upset was the same as provoking Ethan. And I couldn't afford another night in the rain, and yet even as I withdrew, Ethan seemed more unsettled, his gaze lingering on me when I chose the farthest seat at the dinner table, his voice colder when he spoke to Vanessa, his hand reaching for mine out of habit only for me to quietly pull away with some excuse, and though he tried to act as if nothing had changed, I could feel the tension brewing beneath his calm facade, because the more indifferent I became, the more restless he seemed. As if my absence hurt him in ways my presence never could, but I didn't let myself fall for it, not anymore, because every time I remembered the way he had shut that door in my face, the way he had held Vanessa's hand while I collapsed in the rain, I reminded myself that Ethan Miller was not the boy who once promised me chocolate under the village sky. He was someone else now, someone who could crush me without flinching, and no matter how soft his voice turned or how many times he tried to explain that he and Vanessa were just friends, his actions spoke louder than words, and I could see with painful clarity that he would always choose her first when it mattered. So I pushed forward with my plan to transfer schools, quietly speaking to my homeroom teacher, arranging the paperwork, and counting the days until I could leave the Miller house behind. But fate has a cruel sense of humor, because the closer I got to leaving, the more Ethan seemed to pull me back, sitting beside me during breaks, reminding me to take my medicine, offering me water like we were still the same children who shared everything. And when Vanessa started to be ostracized by our classmates after the truth of her stealing for her grandfather's surgery spread, Ethan's loyalty to her wavered for the first time, his tone sharper when he defended her, his eyes darting to mine as if he was waiting for me to step in. But I didn't. I just watched quietly, my calmness infuriating him more than my jealousy ever had. Because the old Emma Carter would have stormed over, demanded answers, picked a fight until I was left humiliated and in tears. But this Emma just smiled faintly and said nothing, and I could tell he hated it. He hated that he no longer had the power to rile me up, to make me run after him, to make me beg for scraps of affection, and maybe deep down he was starting to realize what it meant to lose someone who had once given him everything without hesitation. But I wasn't going to give him the chance to reel me back in, not when my heart was already halfway out the door, not when every part of me was screaming that staying would only mean drowning again the next time a storm rolled through. So even as he grew more restless, more unpredictable, even as his mother kept insisting that our engagement would make everything right, I held my ground, because I knew I had to leave before he broke me completely. And that conviction only hardened the night I saw him carry Vanessa in his arms to the car, telling me she had fainted and he needed to rush her to the hospital, his voice clipped but filled with urgency. Leaving me to fend for myself in the dark while the driver worried about my safety, and I smiled weakly and said I would take the bus home, because I didn't want to be a burden anymore. I didn't want to be second place in my own life, and as I sat by the window of the bus, the city lights blurring past me, I opened the ticket app on my phone and quietly booked a flight. My hands steady, my heart oddly calm, because I knew this time I wasn't bluffing, this time I was truly leaving, and Ethan Miller would have to learn what it felt like to lose the girl who had always been there, even when he never deserved her. And as the screen glowed in the dark, I let myself exhale for the first time in months, because the countdown to freedom had finally begun. The closer my departure date came, the stranger Ethan Miller became, as if he could sense that I was slipping out of his hands, but couldn't figure out why. One moment cold and indifferent the way he had always been, and the next moment hovering around me like he was trying to remember how to be gentle, asking if I'd eaten, if I still had a fever, offering to carry my bag even when I pulled away, and all of it confused me, because I knew it wasn't love. It was habit, and habits can be broken, but I didn't want to waste time figuring out whether he meant it or not. I just wanted to leave. Yet life had a way of twisting the knife, because while I was quietly counting down the days, Vanessa Collins was busy spiraling. Her classmates whispering behind her back about the money she stole, her seat empty for days after her grandfather passed away, and when she returned she looked more fragile than ever, her eyes always downcast, her smile weak. And the rumors only grew harsher until one afternoon during break my deskmate whispered that Vanessa's birthday was tomorrow and she might not have anyone to celebrate with since she had sold her house and lost her only relative, and even though I wanted to stay out of it completely, Ethan happened to overhear and his reaction was explosive, scolding the classmate with a coldness I had never heard from him, demanding to know when they would stop punishing her, and his gaze cut toward me like a blade, as if he was asking why I wasn't speaking up for her either, but I stayed silent, because it wasn't my responsibility to defend the girl who had ruined me, and maybe that silence was what unsettled him most. Because Ethan Miller had always known me as someone who couldn't keep quiet when it came to him, someone who wore her heart on her sleeve, and now I was nothing but a wall he couldn't climb, and that frustrated him more than any fight we had ever had. But I was past caring. I had already set my heart on leaving, and when my homeroom teacher told me my transfer procedures were finally complete, I felt a rush of relief so strong that I could barely hide my smile. The only thing left was to endure one more week until my flight. But fate decided to test me again, because that same night at dinner, Vanessa posted a cryptic status online, a photo of her sitting by a bridge with her legs dangling over the water, and a caption that read, "If I celebrate my birthday alone this year, I won't celebrate it next year." And the second I saw it, my phone buzzed with my deskmate's panicked message asking if she was planning to kill herself, and almost simultaneously Ethan dropped his chopsticks, his face pale as he grabbed his coat, his hands shaking as he muttered that he had to go. And just before he left he stopped at the door, his voice low and rough as he said, "Emma, getting engaged after graduation isn't such a bad thing. When I come back we'll settle this with our parents, okay?" And then he was gone, rushing off to the suburbs to chase after Vanessa, leaving me staring at the empty doorway, my stomach twisting, because even his promises weren't really about me, they were about fixing the guilt he carried for her, and though I nodded quietly and pretended to agree, deep down I knew I would be gone before he returned, so I went upstairs, packed my suitcase, and set my alarm for dawn, ready to leave this house forever. But the next morning fate played another trick on me when my homeroom teacher called to say my transfer was delayed for another week due to a clerical issue, and I sat there on the floor staring at my luggage, my chest hollow with disappointment, realizing I was trapped for a little longer. And while Ethan stayed by Vanessa's side at the hospital, I forced myself to endure the days, his mother calling me to bring him soup because she still treated me like a daughter, and when I delivered it to him at Vanessa's bedside, he barely looked up, saying he wasn't hungry and would give it to her instead, and when I reminded him it was meant for him, he snapped, accusing me of causing all of this, that if I hadn't humiliated Vanessa in public, she wouldn't have run. She wouldn't have gotten hurt. She wouldn't have nearly drowned in the river, and for a second the weight of his blame nearly crushed me until I steadied myself, lifting my chin and calmly telling him that rushing into an engagement wasn't wise, that if something happened in the future it would only be harder to cancel. And though his jaw tightened and his eyes grew stormy, I didn't back down, and when I walked into the elevator I could still feel his gaze burning into me like he was trying to figure out when I had learned to fight back, but I didn't care. I was done playing the role of the girl who begged to stay, and that night when I went home, his phone was on speaker with his mother's voice scolding him not to forget that his future wife had to be me, not Vanessa, and though he responded with casual agreement when he looked at me after the call ended and teasingly asked if I wanted to check his phone, I couldn't stand the intimacy in his tone, couldn't stand the way he acted as if everything was normal. So I excused myself and left him sitting there alone, and maybe for the first time he felt the loneliness he had been forcing on me all along. But by then it was too late, because my mind was already at the airport, already boarding that plane, already flying far away from Ethan Miller and all the pain that came with him. And though part of me still remembered the boy who once pulled me out of the countryside with promises of chocolate, I knew now that love built on memories could never survive the reality of being second choice. And I refused to keep living like that. The days after Vanessa's near-suicide attempt felt like walking on eggshells, Ethan Miller growing more restless by the hour, one moment insisting that he and Vanessa were just friends, and the next running to her side every time she so much as coughed. And I watched it all with the kind of numbness that comes only when you've been broken too many times to feel fresh pain, because I had already decided that no matter how the pieces of this love triangle shifted, I wasn't going to play the role of the jealous fiancé anymore. I was simply counting down the days until I could leave. But Ethan seemed to sense the distance even though I never said a word, following me around the house like a shadow, scolding me for skipping meals, trying to pick up old habits like rubbing my head or carrying me upstairs when I looked tired. But instead of making me melt the way it once did, it only made me recoil. Because I couldn't reconcile this sudden tenderness with the boy who had left me outside in the storm, the boy who had told me I wasn't qualified to humiliate Vanessa, the boy who had chosen her tears over my dignity. And though he looked almost confused by my lack of reaction, it didn't stop him from trying harder. As if he thought if he acted like the Ethan of our childhood, then maybe I would slip back into being the Emma who adored him unconditionally. But that Emma was gone, buried the moment the rain soaked through my skin that night. And every time Vanessa inserted herself with her weak smiles and soft apologies, thanking Ethan for taking care of her in the hospital, offering him home-cooked meals in fancy lunchboxes, I simply watched from the sidelines, my hands tightening around the milk carton he pressed into my palm as if I was the one he wanted to feed instead, and maybe that embarrassed her because she stood there holding her untouched thermos while he casually asked me what I wanted for lunch. But I didn't gloat, I didn't fight, I didn't even look at her. I just whispered that anything was fine and walked away with him, because indifference was sharper than jealousy, and I could see her falter under the weight of it. Yet Ethan still didn't seem to understand that it wasn't about Vanessa anymore. It was about him and the way he had torn me apart piece by piece, and I wasn't going to glue myself back together just to hand him the same weapon again. So when he tried to bargain with me late at night, telling me to just say the word and he would stop seeing her, that he would keep his distance if that's what I wanted, I only shook my head and told him our current arrangement suited me just fine, non-interference until I left. And the look on his face when I said that was the closest thing to panic I had ever seen from him, like he finally understood that I wasn't bluffing, that this wasn't another childish tantrum I'd get over. This was me cutting the last string tying us together. And instead of chasing me like I once did him, he tried to guilt me into staying, waiting until dinner to eat, because the nanny said he refused food without me, his complexion pale and his stomach aching from hunger. His silent suffering turned into an invisible rope that tightened around my chest until I gave in and agreed to reconcile just to stop watching him destroy himself. But even that wasn't enough, because days later he packed a suitcase. telling me with forced sincerity that he was the only friend Vanessa had left in the city, that he couldn't ignore her after everything, that he would stay in a hotel and send me his location every night so I wouldn't doubt him, and the way he rehearsed his excuses made me realize he had already decided long before opening his mouth. So I just smiled faintly and told him to go, my calmness startling him so much that he promised again and again he would come back soon. But the truth was I had already made up my mind to leave for good. And the night before my flight, I gathered my closest classmates for a farewell dinner, deleting Ethan's number as soon as I walked out of the restaurant, ignoring the steady stream of messages asking where I was, whether I had eaten, if I was safe. And when he finally texted that he wanted to plan our engagement party after graduation, I replied with a short, okay, before turning my phone off for good, because tomorrow I would be gone, and there would be no engagement, no second chances, no Emma and Ethan, just silence. But of course fate wasn't finished mocking me, because the next morning, just as I was about to leave, my teacher called to say the transfer had been postponed. Another week trapped in this house, another week of pretending, and though the disappointment nearly suffocated me, I kept packing anyway. Because whether it was tomorrow or next week didn't matter. What mattered was that I would leave, and when Ethan returned from Vanessa's side with exhaustion written across his face, when he tried to explain again that she was unstable, that she needed him, that I should understand, I just nodded and said nothing, because I didn't want to argue anymore. I didn't want to waste another tear on him. I didn't want to keep being the girl who lived in the shadow of someone else's pain. I wanted out, and this time nothing he did could stop me. Not his explanations, not his sudden bursts of tenderness, not his guilt-ridden apologies whispered too late at night when he thought I was asleep, because all I saw when I closed my eyes was the image of that door slamming in my face, the rain soaking me to the bone, and I knew that if I didn't escape now, I never would, so I steeled myself for the final week, every hour dragging. Every glance from him a reminder that he still believed I was his no matter how cruelly he treated me, but he was wrong, because my heart was already boarding that plane without him. The night before I was supposed to leave for good felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the suitcase packed neatly by my bed, my ticket confirmation glowing faintly on my phone screen, and every beat of my heart whispering that freedom was just hours away. But Ethan Miller, as if sensing the shift, seemed more uneasy than ever, his texts coming in one after another asking where I was, what I was doing, when I would be home, and when I ignored him he escalated to calling, his voice hoarse and trembling as he reminded me about our so-called engagement after graduation, insisting we should invite my friends because everyone else would be busy traveling, and I just typed back a short reply, okay, then set the phone down and walked away. Because I wasn't going to let his sudden panic dictate my future, not when he had never once chosen me when it mattered, and the next morning as the sun was barely stretching over the horizon, I wheeled my suitcase out the door with my heart hammering but steady, every step toward the airport like shedding a chain that had kept me bound for years, and when I boarded the plane, turned off my phone, swapped SIM cards, and stared out at the rising sky, I felt something inside me finally exhale, as if I could breathe again after suffocating for so long, because this time I wasn't bluffing, I wasn't threatening, I wasn't waiting for him to come after May was gone, and for the first time I felt proud of myself for choosing me, but back at the Miller estate chaos was brewing, because by the time Ethan returned from taking Vanessa home, the nanny had already told him I'd left before dawn. And when his phone rang with his mother's furious voice demanding to know why I had suddenly called off the engagement and transferred schools, all he could mutter was that I was just throwing a temper tantrum, though deep down he knew it wasn't true. Because this time there was no temper, no drama, just silence, the kind of silence that meant finality, and though Vanessa tried to slip closer, offering him calming soup and soft words, he pushed her away for the first time, his temper sharp, his words cruel, telling her he was tired of her excuses and didn't want her in his house anymore. And maybe that was the moment she realized what I had known all along, that Ethan Miller wasn't kind, he wasn't loyal, he wasn't even decisive. He was just a boy who wanted to have it both ways until both options slipped through his fingers, and when she confessed that she liked him, that she thought he was special. He didn't smile or comfort her. He simply said he already had a girlfriend and that it was me, even though by then I was already on a plane miles away, and she laughed bitterly, telling him he was a coward who couldn't face the truth, that he used me as an excuse to reject her when he had already lost me, and maybe her words finally pierced through the haze he had been living in because for days afterward he tried to reach me, calling my parents only to be told I had changed my number, sending messages that vanished into the void, searching for excuses to blame me for leaving when the truth was written all over his actions, that every time I needed him he turned away. And when I finally walked out he acted surprised, but I didn't care anymore. I didn't feel the sting of his absence. I didn't feel the panic of wondering what he was doing. I didn't even feel the urge to check my phone. I just dove into my new school, my new city, throwing myself into studying for the college entrance exams and learning what it meant to build a life without him, and slowly the ache in my chest faded, replaced with determination. Because for the first time in years I was choosing myself instead of waiting for someone else to choose me, and when the results came out and I ranked among the top 15 in the city, I stood in front of the campus gates with my acceptance letter and felt nothing but relief. But fate, as always, had one more twist, because one summer afternoon Ethan appeared outside my home, looking nothing like the untouchable boy I remembered, his shoulders tense, his voice hesitant as he said it had been a long time. And when he pressed a beautifully wrapped gift box into my hand and congratulated me on my score, adding that his mother had asked him to deliver it, I accepted it politely and thanked her, but when he turned away and whispered that he was sorry, that he regretted everything, that he should have never let me go, I just stared at him for a moment, nodded once, and walked back inside, because an apology didn't erase the nights I spent crying alone. It didn't erase the humiliation. It didn't erase the storm that froze me to my bones. And though part of me acknowledged that his words closed the last wound in my chest, I didn't need them anymore, because I had already healed, and as I prepared to step into college life with my head held high, I knew that Ethan Miller's regret belonged to him, not me, and I wasn't going to carry it another step, because my story didn't end with him. It began the moment I walked away. By the time summer melted into autumn and the campus buzzed with the excitement of a new semester, I had already left Ethan Miller behind in every way that mattered, and though his shadow sometimes lingered in the back of my mind like a ghost I used to know, it no longer had the power to choke me, because every time I walked through the gates of my university, every time I sat in the library surrounded by students who only knew me as Emma Carter, the girl who ranked top 15 in the city, not Emma Carter, the forgotten fiancée of Ethan Miller, I felt the freedom seep into my bones, the kind of freedom I had only dreamed of when I was trapped in his house watching him hold Vanessa Collins's hand while I shivered outside in the rain. And I realized then that leaving wasn't just about escaping him, it was about finally finding myself, the version of me who didn't define her worth through someone else's eyes, the version of me who knew she deserved more than being second best, and so, when he appeared again months later, standing at the edge of the crowd during the freshman welcome ceremony, his eyes searching for mine with a mixture of hope and guilt, I didn't flinch, I didn't rush forward the way I once would have. I simply looked at him calmly until he dropped his gaze because he finally understood that the girl who once cried for him, begged for him, clung to him no matter how cruelly he treated her, no longer existed, and when he tried to speak after the event, stammering something about wanting to explain, I smiled faintly and said there was nothing left to explain, because explanations were for the living, and whatever we had died the night he closed the door in my face and he froze, as if the words pierced deeper than any insult ever could. But it wasn't meant to wound him, it was simply the truth, and I had no energy left for lies, so I walked away, my head high, my heart light. And from that moment on he became nothing more than a memory, the kind that drifts in and out when I pass by certain streets or hear the sound of rain against the window, bittersweet but no longer bleeding, and though I knew he would carry his regret for years to come, I also knew it wasn't mine to bear. Because for once in my life I had chosen myself, and that was worth more than any apology he could ever give. So when my friends joked about the mysterious boy who came to see me, and I shrugged it off with a laugh, I felt a peace I had never known, because I was finally living for me and not for the version of Emma Carter who had been raised to believe her life revolved around someone else's affection. And as the seasons turned and I buried myself in late-night study sessions, group projects, and the chaotic thrill of college life, I realized that moving on wasn't about finding someone new to fill the void. It was about realizing the void didn't exist anymore, that I had been whole all along, just blinded by the storm Ethan dragged me into. And now that I had walked out of it, I wasn't going back, not even if he begged on his knees, because the rain that once felt like punishment had become my baptism, stripping away the girl who begged to be seen and leaving behind a woman who could stand on her own. And as I stood by the old slogan board on campus one evening, the wind tugging at my hair, the golden light spilling across the courtyard, I whispered to myself that I would rather be alone and free than trapped and unloved, and in that moment I knew my story wasn't ending, it was only just beginning, and whatever came next, it would be mine to write, not Ethan's, not Vanessa's, not anyone's but mine, because Emma Carter was no longer the girl in the rain. She was the girl who walked away and never looked back.